Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this, at least where I am, beautiful sunny Friday. Today we have James Kovacevic from Prioritization, and he's going to be kind of wrapping up the series he's been doing with us on job plans and work management. So today it's all about getting your work done. Couldn't we all use some help with that? So looking forward to that. Just a couple things before I turn it over to James. As we've been saying all along, definitely, take advantage of our team at UE Systems being kind of off the road and homebound. We're here to hopefully, help you guys out with anything that you might have been kind of putting off. Now's a great time to brush up on your software, brush up on, maybe helping you get some procedures in place, talk through different applications, different permanent monitoring solutions that we've got, whatever you might be feeling like you need some help with, definitely lean on us and we'll hop on a Zoom meeting or a GoToMeeting, whatever the case may be, and help you out as best we can. And of course, as things are starting to open back up a little bit, I know our guys will be really happy to get back out and be face to face with y'all in your facilities. So just always look to us as a resource. And to that, this is, I think, kind of the last webinar we're doing in this joint effort we've had going on with Prioritization and RDI. So we've had a great couple of months of sharing content from all three of us, providing out, topics on motion amplification, and Prioritization has been doing, everything, like I said, with James, with all the job planning, and we had some asset criticality webinars, root cause, some leadership topics. And of course, on the ultrasound side, we've covered almost all the ultrasound topics, different applications and such. So all of those webinars we've done, we record all of them, and they're all archived on this website you see here, help.prioritization.com. In addition to that, they've also gathered, kind of curated a bunch of no-cost, short-term project-based learning opportunities, videos, some really cool templates you can take advantage of. I think they're going to be switching over to kind of a new initiative about helping you guys kind of get back started the right way. So I'm sure you'll be seeing some information from Prioritization on that, and we'll of course share it out with y'all as well, because I'm sure they'll have some really great resources to help as everybody is hopefully kind of getting back into a bit more of a normal routine. So help.prioritization.com, make note of that. It's a great resource, and we've really enjoyed working with everybody and doing these webinars. So no doubt we'll be doing some more of these things in the future, and we've got some announcements about some other activities that we're going to be doing that we'll make everybody aware of here in the next couple of weeks. So you can look forward to that. So just a couple housekeeping. Like I said, we're recording this, so if you got to hop off or if you want to share this with somebody else that couldn't make it, we'll have it up on our YouTube channel, as well as, again, that website that I just was telling you about. So, definitely make note of that. We welcome questions. You can type those into the questions box throughout the session. We'll be sure to get those questions over to James, during the session if it makes sense, or of course at the end. And if we don't get to all the questions, not to worry, we'll be sure we get the questions over to James and his team so they can follow up with you all offline. And as I say every time we do one of these, just ignore any crazy sounds and barking and things that you might hear. I think I've got everybody locked away and occupied, hopefully, with TV and things like that. So, but just bear with me if the rails fall off a little bit here. We're kind of 8 weeks or so into this. People are starting to get a little stir crazy here. So anyhow, with that, I am going to turn the screen over to you, James, and we'll let you take it away.
All right, excellent. Just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. All right, excellent. So welcome everyone, thank you. Today we're going to talk about getting your work done. All right, now that is a major challenge in some organizations, and sometimes, our work gets done a little late. Maybe we get it done, but it's not the right time. There's lots of concerns with getting work done. But before we dive into that, for those that, I haven't had the opportunity to speak in front of before, just wanted to introduce myself. My name is James Kovacevic. I'm a principal instructor with Prioritization. Been with them about 3 years now. Prior to that, I was implementing maintenance and reliability programs for a large multinational corporation all over the globe. So I've spent time in Africa, South America, Europe, Asia, all implementing maintenance and reliability programs in addition to here in North America. Shameless plug, if you guys want to listen to a podcast, we've had some UE staff on there. We bring in all kinds of people to talk about different maintenance and reliability topics. New episode gets released every Tuesday, and that is the Rooted in Reliability podcast. So if you want to learn more, it's a good way to get some additional information as you're driving to or from work. And we cover all different topics within maintenance and reliability. All right, enough about me. Let's talk about getting our work done. So, do you ever feel like this? Do you ever feel that your plant on fire and no matter what you do, you can't get ahead? Are you guys struggling to get your the follow-up from PMs or the findings from predictive maintenance or ultrasound done on time? There's a problem with work management and where that if we're not following up on those actions in a timely manner, whether they're coming from operators, PMs, PDMs, we're doing the right things trying to be proactive, but we're not following up on it. And it feels like everything is an emergency. We're very reactive in that way, right? One of the challenges we have with not getting work done is that it continues to feed that reactive cycle. And it feels like we're rushing from emergency to emergency. And that's not what we want to do. We got to have a system that allows us to find something with ultrasound or with motion amplification, get that corrective work order into the system, get it planned, get it scheduled, get it executed so we can eliminate that and move on to some other planned work. I don't know how many times I've worked, whether I was the maintenance manager or maintenance planner at the time or worked with other organizations, and you have mechanics or technicians going, I told you that was going to fail. I even put in a work request for it. You guys just don't do anything with them. All right, that happens a lot, and that's what we got to get away from. All right, it's a bit of a challenge. So why does that happen? Well, what we find is there's a lot of emotion-based decision-making going on within the work management process. All right, now that emotion-based decision-making, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. That's one of those emotion-based decision-making things that happens with our work prioritization and our work scheduling. We also have some emotion-based decision-making going on that, I'm buddies with the planner, so I'll get my work done first, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of things like that. And what that emotion-based decision-making leads to is a lot of chaos and confusion in the plant because there's no consistent way to identify the work, prioritize it, and schedule it and get it out there. All right. With that being said, there are a lot of different things that come up. So when we rely on emotion-based decision-making, we don't have the consistent way of doing things. We get work that is not completed, right? We just straight up don't do it. All right, some of the other issues that come up from time to time is, hey, I found this issue during a PM. I know this machine's not going to be down again for another couple months. Do I make this repair as part of that PM and then move on? Or do I plan or submit a request and plan and schedule it for later? That's another one of those decisions that, is highly variable within a lot of organizations, and it's all based on emotion. The other thing we have is it really an emergency or not? Do I want to drop our planned work and break into the schedule to do these types of activities? Oftentimes that's not the case. A lot of times, everything's an emergency, and as a result, nothing is, and we wonder why we're still reactive. Right? So there's lots of different things that is going on from emotion-based decision making. It's really, what work are we going to do? When are we going to do it? Are we going to repair it now or later? And is it really an emergency or not? Right? And sometimes this will even vary amongst maintenance team leads or depending on the mood they're in during that day. And the problem with this is it just leads to chaos and confusion within the workplace. Now, many of you have seen this work management model before. We're going to talk about it very briefly. But really what it is work management is all about getting the work into our work management funnel. So these raindrops represent that work. It's going to come into our funnel. We're going to plan it, which is taking those requests, the unplanned work that's so far exists, which is yellow here. We're going to convert that to planned work orders with our planners. From there, we're going to cascade that out build it out into a 4-week rolling schedule, and then micro schedule to the day, right? So really what we're trying to do with work management is manage all the work coming into our system and do it in a way that's repeatable, consistent, and is going to give us the results we need. Now, oftentimes, if we don't have a good work management system, we get our water or work orders spilling over this funnel and we lose it. We also get drops that don't land in this funnel and we lose that work as well. All right, so there's lots of different things that go on with a work management process that we need to consider. What we're really going to talk about is the work management system as a whole, but really where do we fail and where do we struggle with implementing work management so we can actually get our work done. So this is a standard work management process. Now, there's some different variations out there, but they're all going to have some of the same key components. They're always going to have some sort of work identification or work request process. There's going to be a decision point where we determine if it's an emergency or not. There's going to be some planning, some scheduling that goes on. We're going to get to work execution. We're actually doing the work. Then we're doing some closeout as well. And if it's an emergency, we might have a process for that unscheduled work. And all that information is going to feed up into the various pieces of our maintenance program. Reliability engineering, so we can eliminate defects from occurring, which improve the PM program, and so on and so forth. All right. Now, Maureen, I have a poll if you could pull up, and I just want to get an idea how many people on the call have a defined work management process. And I don't mean, tribal knowledge, but I mean actually defined with roles, responsibilities, step by step. This is how we do this.
Right. See it up there on the screen, folks. All right. And we got a good about 60% of folks have voted, and we've got 66% saying yes, 21% no, and 13% unsure.
All right, excellent. At least we got 20 or 2/3 of the group saying yes, we got it. For those that are unsure if you have it, when I do assessments or audits or review maintenance programs, if the people that are managing the work management process, like planners, schedulers, maintenance team leads, if they don't know if we have one, then to me, we don't have one because it hasn't been communicated and trained out. So, this is really the foundational elements we need to get work done. And it's not fun and exciting to understand the business process. I get that. All right. The last thing you want to do is sit there and map this process and figure out all the different working pieces to it. But it's one of those things we need to do to drive reliability, drive consistency, and more importantly, ensure we get our work done. Now, the overall work management process is here, but I want to talk about some of the key components within this and what we really want it to do for us. And then we'll get into some of the issues with them. So the first piece, work identification, is really all about identifying the work that needs to be done, whether it's through a PM, through a predictive maintenance activity, whether it's through operator inspections or observations by an operator or mechanic. It's about identifying those and getting them into the CMMS. Not emails, not phone calls, but into the CMMS with enough information that we can answer the next question. All right. The first question we need to answer, is this an emergency or not? Now, if it's not an emergency, we're going to go over to planning because remember, we want planners working at least 1 to 2 weeks out in advance, preferably further than that. I would say up to 6 weeks out. All right. Now, if it is an emergency, then we're going to remove that from the planning process, and that's going to go right to the maintenance team lead. All right. The maintenance team lead is going to micro schedule that into the daily schedule, get it executed so we mitigate the risk of that failure that's going on. Now, going back to planning, what we're trying to do for planning is really get our work request into a planned and ready state. That means identifying the steps to complete the task, the resources we need, what parts we need, getting all that specified and getting it all on site and ready to go. Once those materials are on site, all resources identified, then we can move over to the scheduling realm. And scheduling is where we get a lot of that emotion-based decision making. How do we prioritize? Inconsistencies in that prioritization. How do we build that schedule? All right, so there's a lot that goes on with there, but there ultimately we're trying to build a schedule that's loaded to 100% of available resources, then cascade that out to micro scheduling by the day by the maintenance team lead. From there, we got the work execution. And that's just exactly what it is. We're going to get out there, we're going to do the work, we're going to make those repairs, do the PMs, those sorts of things. And then we move to that closeout process. Now that is very, very important for a variety of reasons. The closeout process is all about capturing the right data from the work orders. So what was the actual time taken to complete that task? What were the actual parts used? Were there any findings that came out of that activity that we need to follow up on? And as we grow more mature, we want failure codes as well. So we want that object damage cause or part problem cause, depending on which system you're using. And we want to capture that so we can feed that into the reliability processes and improve our system overall. Right. So there's a lot of moving pieces here we really want working well, and we have to start with having documented. Now, why do we need this work management process? Why do we want this planning and scheduling thing? Well, essentially, we're just trying to move things further up that PF curve. Now, the PF curve, potential failure point to the functional failure point, when we rely on traditional inspections, listening, looking, those types of things, we don't have a lot of time. We're down here in this range where we have, anywhere from 1 week to 5 days really of something failing from when we can detect it. What happens is I find a lot of organizations jump into predictive maintenance and these other tools, and it's a great technology to use, but the problem is they don't have the work management process in place. So what happens is we find these errors or issues in the equipment way up here at the P1 or P2 point, but we don't have a consistent way of planning and scheduling that work. So what happens? All of a sudden, the failure continues to go and go and go, and then all of a sudden it fails, and we still haven't planned it. When we have a good work management process, we identify those issues, it starts the planning process immediately, the parts get ordered, we do the scheduling process, and we take that equipment down and repair it on our time, not the equipment's. Right? So that's what we're really trying to do, is just give ourselves more time to react to the issues we find, plan it, schedule it, and repair it on our time. Sounds simple enough, right? Now, one of the biggest problems we have is with work requests, right? Work requests are a major challenge for a lot of organizations. Some of the reasons is that only maintenance can put in work requests, not operations, or only potentially maybe operations supervisors or operations team leads. We don't allow everyone to put in work requests, and that's a double-edged sword there. On the one side, we want people to be able to put in those requests when they see an issue. So if operators detect an issue, we want to be able to capture that and work through it. But on the flip side, we got to balance with duplicates and triplicates of work, getting the right information, those sorts of things. But one of the additional challenges with work requests and work identification is that it doesn't always come in a consistent way. Sometimes we'll get it through the CMMS, which is what we want. Someone's going to go in, type it in on that CMS, or type in that work request, and it's going to come into the CMMS as a work request. Other times, when I was a planner, I would get these little sticky notes all over my desk if I was in there of this needs to be repaired, this needs to be done, so on and so forth. Well, those sometimes get lost, they get overlooked, they get ignored, and those requests don't actually make it into the system. Same thing with radio calls or phone calls and texts. We need to have a consistent way to get work into the system. All right, and the only way to truly do that and make sure it's reliable is to have people directly enter those requests into the CMMS. Now, when they do that, we need to make sure we have the right information. So when I think of the right information, I want a description of the problem. What is the equipment doing or not doing that it should be? Right? I want to know what equipment it's actually associated with. Don't tell me it's in this room or this building. Tell me what piece of equipment. Now, if we have a good asset hierarchy, it makes that a lot easier. If there's any history that led up to this failure, I want to know that as well. Right? Who requested the work? Not the person putting in the request, but who actually requested this work, so we can follow up with them and get some additional information. SAP, for example, they have automatically who created that notification, but there's also another field for requested by that can be populated if it's not the same person. Right? These types of things go a long way to making sure that the requests go in the system, we can evaluate them properly, and we can act on them. Now, once we have these in the system, then we got to start asking ourselves, is this an emergency request or not? And a lot of organizations, really struggle with what is an emergency. So when I think of an emergency, I got to ask these questions. Is there an immediate impact on environmental health or safety? And I say immediate because that to me means if we don't do this now, there's a risk of injury or release or something of that nature. Painting a parking curb, to me, it's important from an EHS perspective, but isn't an emergency. No, that's probably something we can plan for next week. And some people may disagree with me on that, and that is okay. But unless it's going to have an immediate impact, it's not really an emergency. Now, if it's not an immediate impact on environmental health and safety, what about quality? Now, if it's going to impact product quality, yes, we're going to perform that work as an emergency. If it's not that, is there going to be immediate impact on production rate or capacity? If the answer is yes, we're going to do it. And if it's not any of those, then we're going to submit a work request and work it through the system. All right. What I see a lot of organizations do is they have a framework such as this, but they also put criteria behind this. So they'll have certain amounts or what various examples of what is an immediate impact on EH&S or quality or so on and so forth. They'll have some sort of decision-making framework in place for these types of things. Now, Maureen, if you want to hit that second poll, I'm just curious as to how many people actually have defined what is an emergency, what is not an emergency.
All right, there you go.
All right. Now, well, we're collecting that data on the polls, I'm gonna talk about why this is so important for a moment. So I was with an organization who maintenance was really getting beat up. Maintenance was getting beat up because they were measured on schedule compliance and PM compliance, and they weren't hitting their numbers, and the site director was getting in trouble for it from corporate. There's a lot of things going on. And what's interesting is as that site director started to dive into the causes of these, he realized that the maintenance group was building a realistic schedule. They were planning the work, they were scheduling it, they were assigning work by day by person. So he started asking, well, you guys are doing all the right things. Why are we not getting this work done? And the answer ended up really being is that, well, we have all these emergencies that come up. And the plan was fairly stable. So he was wondering, what emergencies are you talking about? So we started asking and diving into that a bit more. And what he came to find was that certain departments would know about things 6, 7, 8 months in advance, but they wouldn't bother to put in a work request or show up to the prioritization meeting and get that on the schedule. They would wait till the day before it was due or the week before it was due and cause a big scene to get that work done because they failed to plan and prioritize on their end. Well, very, very quickly, that plant director realized what was going on and he put in a couple rules. And the rules were, if it's truly an emergency and you need to break into the weekly schedule, you got to come see me and I'll give approval for it. Someone only approached him once for something that was not a legitimate emergency, and after he had the conversation with that individual, that problem went away. Now that is an extreme version of what a lot of organizations do, but it stopped a lot of this unnecessary quote unquote emergency work from occurring, which allowed the team to focus on the planned work, the PMs, the predictive maintenance activities, and actually further improve the operation of the plant. Not having this clearly defined emergency criteria really hinders a lot of organizations. All right, Maureen, what do we have for polls?
All right. Yeah, so 57% do have a framework, 35% are a no, and 7% unsure.
All right, excellent. So the majority have some sort of decision-making framework for this. Great to see, great to hear. Curious to see what type of criteria you're using. If you want to throw it in the question box, I will be happy to take a look at it after. Just curious to what people are using, how they're doing that. I'll sort through that in addition to the questions after the call, but always curious to see how people are doing that. Now, if it is planned work and it's not an emergency, then we move over to planning. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on planning. We have a couple webinars we've done already on this topic. You can go catch those after. But that planning is really defining what work is being performed. We're deciding who will do what work. So do we need mechanics, electricians, combination of those, that sort of thing. We got to establish a time plan, if you will, a time estimate. How much time do we need to do each task for this job overall, that sort of thing. Got to establish a cost, approvals and costing that may need to happen. So we're going to define that. And then it's defining a procedure, if you will, the task sequence, the methodology that's going to ensure that that job is done repeatably and consistently. This is very important for PMs and predictive maintenance. We want consistent, repeatable results from those inspections. If we have that, then we can generate the right follow-up work with plenty of time to react to it. If we have a PM that says inspect pump, we all know what's going to happen. Some mechanics are going to take their time, check seals, listen to the bearings, do all these great things. Others are going to say, yep, it's still there, check and move on. Right? The planning is very, very important to drive that consistency and repeatability. There's lots that can be done on it. And like I said, there's a couple of the recorded webinars that UE has on YouTube and we have on help.erudicio.com that covers this in detail if you want some more information. Now, once we have it planned, then we can get the prioritization piece. And the prioritization piece is another one of those emotional things that a lot of organizations go through. Now, one of the ways we deal with that is a formal prioritization method. One example here is the RHYME method. So here, we're going to have the criticality of our assets listed down one side of that matrix. We're going to have the different types of work across the top. What this allows us to do is, take the criticality, multiply it by the work classification, get a number, and that's going to tell us what work to schedule first. It's a great way to review all of our work and get it prioritized at least 80 or 90% of the way there. The one problem with this method is, this low priority work here, that's never going to get high enough up the list to actually do the work. So what we do is we use an age factor. So we take this number that we come out of this RHYME method with and multiply it against this multiplier for what the age of the work is. So it's going to take this low priority work and move it up the scale over time. Right? But that's only one method. There's many of other methods you have out there. So some that I've seen is a logic tree, and it's going to ask a series of questions, and it's going to tell you roughly what bucket of time you're going to put that work into. Is it next week? Is it 1 to 4 weeks out, or 1 to 2 weeks out, 2 to 4 weeks out, greater than 4 weeks out, and so on and so forth. There's a variety of different ways to do this. Right? Now, Maureen, I got a poll to see who has a formal prioritization method, if you could launch that.
All right.
Now, this prioritization method, a lot of organizations consider it just from a scheduling standpoint. We're going to decide what work we're going to schedule first based on this and this alone. And I think, we want to use this framework to get us that 80 or 90% there, but there's got to be some give and take and some discussion around what's going on within the organization. For example, I'm a big advocate of scheduling 90% of our available resources based on this type of method here, based on what's most important to the organization. The other 10%, I'm going to leave for operations to request their special project. Something may be changing. When we first looked at it, it may have been a 25 on our scale, but now, because time's progressed, it's gotten a little bit worse. Maybe now it's a 49 or 64 or whatever it is. That other 10% we're going to leave for those requests from operations and to account for things that are changing over time. The reason I really leave that amount in there for operations is so we get their buy-in, we get their support with the work management process. If we don't have their support for this, they're going to go back to that very first step of work request and they're going to work around the system. They're going to go see their friend or their buddy and they're going to get the work done around that system. So you always leave a little bit of time in your scheduling to accommodate their just because work orders. It just really helps establish the process and gain their buy-in. Sorry, go ahead, Maureen.
Sorry. No, I was going to say we're pretty even Steven on this one. So 43% are at a yes, 46% at no, and then 11% unsure.
All right, and it's not surprising that this one's a little bit lower than others. A lot of organizations don't take time to do this. Like I said, you can have this type of approach. You can do a logic tree approach. I've even seen some organizations, and I've done it in SAP, where we modified IW38 or IW37N for those of you that speak SAP, and we pulled in the asset criticality and our work priority was a number, so we can multiply those two together and actually have a column that gave us the rhyme automatically. Over time we factored in the work order age and that, but we built that in automatically to make this easy for us. So from a planner scheduler standpoint, we can start right at the top. The other way we want to use these prioritization methods once we define them out is we use it to organize for our planners what work they're going to plan and schedule first. So one of the ways I structured this in the past is we use that logic tree approach for the planners and the maintenance team leads to review all the new work orders every day that came in the past 24 hours. There they would decide if it is an emergency or not. If so, it'd go right to the maintenance planner. And if it was not an emergency, they'd use a logic tree to prioritize their planning. What we were doing is actually looking at that and saying, okay, this one's 2 or 3 weeks out, this one's 4 weeks out, whatever the case may be based on that decision tree or logic tree. And we change the due dates in the system at that point to reflect that. So we started building a rolling schedule, sometimes out to 6 or 8 weeks based on reviewing through that logic tree, right? What it really allowed us to do is just reduce our scheduling workload and prioritize the efforts of the planners. Once we have that prioritization, then we can get to scheduling, right? Now scheduling, it's more than just lining up work orders and people. There's a lot of things we got to work around: equipment availability, material availability, specific skill sets. We got to do all those things. But what we're really trying to do here is arrive at agreed upon or negotiated weekly schedule with operations. So to do that, we're always going to have our PM and PDM activities we got to get done. Roughly, it should account for about 30% of our overall labor requirements for that week. From there, we're going to have that ready backlog, and that's where we're going to use that prioritization method, is to define, what is that next 60% of the work we're going to do. All right, so that's going to bring us up to around that 90% mark. We're going to get into a final prioritization meeting with operations. Personally, I like it on a Tuesday or Wednesday for the upcoming week. Gives the planners plenty of time to revise any job plans if they need to, squeeze any last minute ones in, schedule the work, those types of things. And during this meeting, we're going to finalize what that last 10% is. So that might be those special requests from operations. It might be an issue that's been getting worse and we have to address sooner rather than later. It's those types of things. Once we've done that, then we're going to publish our weekly schedule. And when I say publish, it doesn't mean, okay, we're going to save that as an Excel file on a SharePoint site or a shared drive or something of that nature. I mean, we're officially going to publish it. And we're going to do that in one of two ways. One way, if you have a scheduling solution, you're going to lock that in through that scheduling tool, so that way you have your baseline to compare against. The other way it might be is you print it out, that agreed upon schedule, and you have the operations representative who is in that meeting agree to and sign off on that schedule, and the maintenance person sign off on that schedule, and you post it in the maintenance shop plus somewhere in the operational area, so everyone can see what is going to be done that day or that week. The idea behind that is everyone's agreed to this. Now let's hold people accountable to it and get that work done. It also goes a long way to showing operations and other maintenance people that we're actually doing the work, that we're going through the work request, we're prioritizing that, and shows them what we're trying to tackle this week. Now, are we always going to get 100% compliance on that schedule? No, we're not. But we got to load it up and we got to work towards that. From there, with that weekly schedule published, then the maintenance team lead is going to take that, micro schedule it to the day, assign it to the individuals, and move on from there. Now, once we start executing that work, there's a lot of things that come up when we're executing that work, especially with PMs and PDM activities. All right. Now, there's a lot of discussions around, well, do we make a repair during a PM or do we schedule it? What's the point of, putting the equipment back together when we know there's a defect in there? Why don't we just fix it then? So there's a lot of questions around that, and that's one of the things I wanted to address next, is repair during PMs or not? How do we know if we should be doing that? Now, let's talk about why we may not want to. Well, there's a variety of reasons why we may not want to perform that repair during that PM. Maybe we only have a short window of time on that production equipment, and if we make that repair, we're going to overrun that. From that aspect, we got to balance. Do we want to jeopardize starting up production on time and lose some support from operations versus is this truly going to fail and interrupt operations? We got to balance those sorts of things. The other thing is if we have a very tight schedule, especially during a shutdown or an outage where we're on that critical path, if you will, if I take the time to do this other stuff, is it going to delay the entire project? If so, what are we going to do about it? So some of the exceptions to that I really have are what we laid out here kind of in this flow chart here is, will the repair take longer than 15 minutes? All right, and if the answer is no, so if we identify something during a PM, the repair is not going to take more than 15 minutes, all right, we could potentially do this repair during the PM. Does it require parts? If the answer is no, now it's looking real good to do that repair during that PM. And lastly, will the equipment fail before the next planned downtime? If we answer no, no, and yes to those, we're going to perform that repair as part of the PM. Now, obviously, for good work order history tracking and failure tracking, we're going to create a breakdown work order and record it separately from that PM so we can track our failure history, those types of things, but we're still going to get it done during that period of time. Now, if it's going to take longer than 15 minutes, we're going to want to submit that follow-up work request. And if it's important and a big priority, prioritize accordingly. If it requires a bunch of parts, we got to go to the storeroom and find all this stuff, submit the work request, plan it out that way. And if it's not going to fail before the next downtime, why would we take the time to do it in a reactive manner? Let's plan it out accordingly and go through there. All right. So, having these types of criteria in place for deciding on, are we going to make the repair during a PM or predictive maintenance activity, is pretty important. Allows us to get very good at scheduling, to manage the critical path and shutdown and startup times with operations. And it really enables us to improve those PMs over time because we got a good idea of what is actually going on. Now, regardless of whether we do that repair or not, we have to close out the work order. So closing out the work order is important for a variety of reasons. One, it's going to provide the right costing levels so we can identify which equipment or which assets are costing us more to maintain. Once we know that, we can figure out which ones we got to focus on. Right? So if there we want to capture the man hours, the parts used, all that's going to help with the costing. We're going to capture those failure codes. Now, hopefully you don't have failure codes that are very generic. Hopefully they're very specific to the asset that you're working on. And we're capturing, those three components, the part problem cause or object damage cause, because those are really going to drive the reliability process. Those are going to allow us to start eliminating defects. And when I say eliminating defects, I don't mean adding more PMs to the system. I mean truly eliminating them. You'll never PM your way to success. We got to start thinking differently and doing root cause analysis and those great things to eliminate these things from occurring on a regular basis. We also want to capture some comments to update the job plan. Even if the planner spends a lot of time developing a good job plan, I don't ever expect to see a perfect job plan out in the field. If we have a perfect job plan, we probably invested way too much time in that and didn't plan a bunch of the other work we should have been planning. So, we want to capture that feedback. We want to improve our job plans over time. And when we get all this information, we can close out and improve not only the performance of the asset, but our system overall. Once we have that history, like I said, we're going to use it. We're going to look at issues. We're going to look at the number of downtime occurrences for a particular asset or a particular failure mode. We might be looking at total downtime minutes or maintenance costs, where we're spending our time potentially, babysitting the equipment, those sorts of things. We're going to use that history to improve our program overall. Part of those improvements is going to be looking at optimizing our PM frequency, for example. Couple rules of thought out there on that. The first one is the 6-to-1 rule. Every 6 inspections, I should be finding an issue at least once. All right, now if I'm finding an issue 1 out of every 10, we might be inspecting too frequently. If I find an issue every 2 or 3 times, we might not be inspecting often enough. So that 6-to-1 rule gives us a good balance, if you will, for finding the issues and acting accordingly. The other rule of thought for this is that if we're spending 30% of our time doing preventative and predictive maintenance, we should be generating about 50% follow-up work. So if we spend 15% of our time doing PMs, we should be generating about 15% follow-up from PM. So a one-to-one exchange, really. 1 hour of PMs generates 1 hour follow-up. From a predictive maintenance standpoint, we're going to spend about 15% of our time doing that, but we should be generating about 35% overall time as follow-ups from that. So really, 1 hour of PM activities should generate 2 to 3 hours worth of follow-up work. Right? So those are some metrics we use to really look at our PM program, determine if it's effective, how to improve it, those sorts of things. But we need the history to do so. Now, what are some of the benefits of this work management stuff? So there's lots and lots of different benefits. All right. The first one is the wrench time piece. You know, I've talked about wrench time in the past, but it is not the fault of the mechanic. It is the fault of our management systems that allow these wastes to occur. All right. Edward Deming said it best. We got the perfect system to get the results we're getting. So if we don't have good wrench time, look at the management systems, look at the planning, scheduling activities we have. You know, on average, 17 to 35% is the average facility in terms of active repair time or using knowledge, skills, and ability. We want to get that up towards 55%. Doing how we do that, good work management process. We're planning work, we're prioritizing work, we're scheduling work, we're doing all the things we need to do, and we can reduce a lot of these other wastes here. The other thing we want to do is expand that time on that P to F curve. So right now, if we don't have a good work management process and we're relying on a lot of visual and intrusive PMs, we have very little time to plan the work, obtain the parts, schedule the work, execute the work before it fails. Right? If we got a good work management process, we got good PMs and predictive maintenance in place, we can expand that out dramatically. You can notice there that we're still roughly going to use the same amount of time to plan the work. We got a lot more time to obtain the parts, which is how these proactive organizations have way less parts in their storeroom. All right, we can schedule the work, execute the work still well before we hit that failure point. If you notice here on the top one, we're in between the P7 and F. On the bottom one, we're making the repair before we even hit that P7 point. So it gives us a lot more time to actually execute on the findings we've had. The other thing is it makes people happy. They know what they're going to be doing each day. We're going to be less reactive. We're going to have buy-in and support from operations. It's going to be a major, major benefit to the organization overall. We're going to provide consistency, repeatability, and personally, what I found most importantly is from a production and a production planning or operations planning, whichever you may call it in your organization, is they're going to know what to expect. They're going to know 3-4 weeks out how much downtime you need. You're going to be able to forecast your PM requirements a month or 6 weeks or 12 weeks in advance, so they can plan that into their larger operational plan accordingly. It's major, major benefits to the organization. Now I got another poll for you. I think this is potentially the last one, but I can't remember. Maureen, can you pull up the one on work maturity?
Yeah, you got 2 more. So the last one was just a rating one, so that maybe jogs your memory. All right, here we go.
All right, so now that we've kind of talked through what work management is, what some of the benefits are, I'm just curious to where you guys feel you're at from a scale on 1 to 5.
Oh, shoot, I launched the wrong one. Hold on, closing this one. Sorry. Here's the metrics one. There you go.
As you can tell, me and Maureen did not use the proper work management process here and clearly define what we should be doing and scheduling at the appropriate times.
Right. We did that as a lesson on purpose to drive home the point. And I'm sticking to it. Yep. All right. We got about 60%, which seems to be where we hit. And we're looking about kind of middle to a 3. 49% are at the 3. Got 27% at a 2, 13% at a 4, 9% at a 1, and 1% at a 5.
All right. So, that's quite common where you guys are mentioning where you're at, 2s, 3s, 4s, somewhere in that range. There's a lot of work that you can do to take your process to the next level. And that's what we're going to talk about for a couple minutes before we wrap up. All right. Getting work management implemented, it's not an easy task, but it's also not a difficult task. More of it is just taking a pragmatic approach, focusing on the areas that are going to make the biggest difference. So one of the things you want to do, and I'm not going through this in detail with you, but we got to make sure we get people on board. We got to manage the change in the people side of things. Now, I know Sean Eisenhower has talked about that in the past. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but really, one of the things we got to do is we got to convince people of the importance of work management. In order to do that, use the ADKAR model, create some awareness of what work management is, why it's important, that sort of thing. Then speak to the individual desires within each person that's going to be impacted by that. So mechanics, electricians, what's the benefit to them for work management? Well, when I was an electrician on the floor, what I really enjoyed is coming in, getting my work orders, going to do those work orders and not being bothered throughout the day. So if we're being proactive, we're managing the work properly, we're not everything's not an emergency, that's a major advantage to me because I'm not getting pulled away from the stuff I wanted to do. All right. For the storeroom, that might be, hey, we're not going to be having you expedite all these parts and so on and so forth. So we got to create some awareness, create that desire, and then we can start to get this engaged. All right. Now, the first step you got to do to implement a work management process, and it's not the most fun, it's not the most exciting, but we got to start building a business process map for the system. All right. What happens in what sequence? How is this done in SAP or whatever CMMS you're using? All right. In order to do that, we advocate it's a two-step approach. The first step is map the current state. What that really means is get everyone involved, maybe a couple planners, maybe a couple maintenance team leads, maybe a technician or two, and say, what are the current steps to doing this from work request? How do we do work planning? How do we do work scheduling? Best way to do that, grab some sticky notes and a whiteboard, use yellow for the tasks or steps. Lay those out. Once you're done, then you can draw the lines. Now, normally when you do this for a current state, it's going to be messy. It's going to be ugly. We're going to have people going from this step to 3 steps down, back to the second step. Others will be nice and sequenced. It's going to look really, really ugly. While we're doing that, for every one of those single steps, we want to identify any gaps or weaknesses with a red sticky note. So for example, we don't have prioritization criteria. That's a gap or weakness we got to close. So we're going to throw that up there, and so on and so forth. For each step, we're also going to look at, do we have any strengths? So these are things we want to make sure we leverage and continue to do moving forward. We're going to throw those up there. Once we have that done, we understand how it's really happening within our organization. And usually there's multiple ways it's happening. Then the second step to this whole thing is to develop the future state. So using those same people, we want to map out how do we want this to look in the future. So again, using yellow sticky notes, map out the steps in the right order. Now we should have a nice linear map that says step 1 to step 2 and so on and so forth. And while we're doing that, we want to make sure that anytime we saw a red on the current state, we identify what we're going to do to eliminate that and improve the future state. We're also going to reference back to the current state and say, what are those strengths or things we did well that we want to continue doing in the future? All right. For those that rated yourselves at a 1 or 2, for example, in the last poll, I guarantee you guys are still doing some great things within your organization. All the organizations I go to, they're always doing some great things, even if it's informal or through tribal knowledge, and some things that can be improved. So we want to make sure those things that are going well, we want to make sure we continue to do those. And the things that aren't going so well, we drive those improvements. So we use the current state to make sure we continue to do the good things and eliminate those bad things. Once we have that, then we're going to go use the same tool and create a RACI chart. Responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Who is responsible for doing each one of these steps? Who's accountable for making sure they're done? Who do we consult with if there's some decision making or an activity that needs to take place, right? So we're going to document who's consulted. And then lastly, who's informed that this step has been completed or this has moved on or so on and so forth, right? If you're interested in anything on business process mapping or RACI charts, my contact information will be up towards the end of this, and feel free to reach out and I'll get you some more information on those things. It doesn't sound fun, it doesn't sound exciting, but in order to get a reliable plant, we got to have reliable and consistent business processes. So this is where we got to start. The other thing we need to consider when we go to implement this within our organizations is don't use the default workflow within your CMMS. All right. Oftentimes I see a lot of organizations struggle with CMMSs and they go to get a new one because that's gonna fix everything. but it still ends up not working. Well, why? Because they haven't defined their business process and they're trying to make their system work with their business process, work with a CMMS that isn't set up for their business. All right, so the CMMS is there to make our job easier. So let's figure out our business process and make our CMMS match that. Next thing, get your people involved while you're designing it. So that decision criteria around emergency or scheduling or doing a repair during a PM, that shouldn't just be one person defining that. Get some operations representatives, get a couple maintenance representatives, and get them from different functions within those groups so we have full input and buy-in to that. Right? Mention that, that next one, incorporate operations into those decision-making frameworks, the business processes, those types of things. And then lastly, once we've agreed upon that, provide that decision-making frameworks for emergency work, repairs during PMs, prioritizations, and make sure everyone is aware of what those are. Right? When these are out there, people can make the right decisions. We can push down some accountability. We can push down decision making. So now it's not the maintenance manager who has to decide if this is an emergency every time. We can push that down to a team lead or a foreman or even a technician on the floor. All right. We want to push down that decision making where possible. But in order to do so and make people feel safe while doing it, we got to have that decision making framework there for them. Work management, very, very important in organizations. It's one of those fundamental elements. When I work with organizations, I always say if you don't have a good work management process and you don't have a good spares process, I don't care how good your predictive maintenance program is, it's likely not going to deliver the value it can, because you're not going to act on those repairs because you don't have work orders or parts or all these other things going on. So to me, you want to be successful, get your work management in place, get your spares program in place, then you can really drive and leverage the results from your PM and PDM programs. Now with that, I'm open for questions if there's any, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay, so let's see, just so you kind of have a heads up, so when you were talking about kind of having a plan, a couple people had kind of mentioned that, yeah, there's probably a plan. It's in someone's head and not really understood by everybody. So that seems to be a little bit of a common theme, and maybe you can speak to just again kind of how to really help people encourage getting things written out and solidified and communicated out, right?
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? So there is a lot of good informal processes or plans in place for how to do some of these things. Sometimes people don't want to share that because they feel that that is their magic way of staying employed, that if they give that up, then they're easy to be let go. Some people think that way. Others, they just never thought that it would be beneficial to write it down. So in order to get those plans out in the open, we got to understand why they're not there first. So if it's one of those concerns around, if I give away my secrets, now they can let me go, then we got to educate them, work through that. Sometimes one of the ways is talk to them about creating a legacy. Let's document your plan, let's put you as the author, those types of things. Now when people come in, they'll see they created it. That's one way to approach it. But to really get those plans out, think of the ADKAR model, create some awareness and create the desire for this process. Educate them a little bit on why it needs to be documented from a business sustainability standpoint. So when they go on vacation, they don't have to come back to 2 or 3 times the amount of work afterwards. We can leverage things like that. If there's a specific situation or question you have around that and you want to connect with me afterwards, my contact information is up. You can text, call, email, whatever you want. I'll be more than happy to discuss the specifics around this with you.
Yeah, and this work management topic is one of the pillars, of SMRP's body of knowledge, one of the 5 that make up the complete body of knowledge, and of course what the CMRP exam is based on. And James, you're teaching a class on that coming up, right?
Yes, first week of June I will be.
All right, so if anybody's interested in learning more about kind of all of that to do with SMRP's body of knowledge, and you like, what you started to learn here today from James, that's a great opportunity. It'll be, a small enough gathering that it should be safe, and it'll be on the Yorktown and Charleston. So if you're looking to get out and get some training, I think that would be a great opportunity for folks to take advantage of. So just wanted to give free plug for you there. So yeah, so as we said at the beginning, we were recording this. A few of you were asking about that. You've got James's contact info there. So if you're asking for some specific slides, make note of his email and reach out to him directly, or you can always reach out to me and I can connect you with James or anybody else at Prioritization that you're looking for some information from. We'll have this recording up on our website or on YouTube later today. So if you want to check that out, and of course, all of the webinars we've been doing are all housed there on our YouTube channel, and again on that help.irrigatio.com site. So you can check out if you missed the previous webinars that James did or that any of us had done. Those are all there for you. So I'm just going to wrap things up here since we're running on time a little bit. I want to be sure everybody gets off here at 2 o'clock. So again, thanks James so much for the information today. Great content as always. Just letting you know, we got some more webinars that we're doing next week for UE Systems. On Wednesday, we're going to kind of dive into our latest version of DMS. It's DMS 6, and we'll kind of do some overview of what's new with it, some of the features, things like that. So, we should have been teaching a full day software class in beautiful Clearwater Beach, Florida today as part of our conference, but of course, we had to cancel that. So for those of you that are looking for a little bit of software help, we'll dive into that next Wednesday. And then on Thursday, we're going to talk kind of all things energy conservation and how that relates to ultrasound. So leak detection, steam traps, valves, things like that. So that'll kind of wrap up our sort of application specific sessions that we've been doing about ultrasound. So look for the invite to go out for those on Monday. But again, want to thank everybody at Prioritization and RDI Technologies for kind of working with us over the last couple months to provide all these webinars. We're not going to be stopping. We'll still be putting webinars out every week, and I'm sure we'll be inviting our friends from Prioritization and RDI back to help out with those as well. So stay tuned for all of that. And with that, I'll put our contact information up. You can definitely email me. I certainly email you all enough, so feel free to return the favor and shoot me an email with any questions you might have or any help you might need. We'll be happy to get back with you on that. And I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. Stay healthy, and we will catch you guys later.